Hello and welcome to another episode of the Book Talk, organized by the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. My name is Fauzan Arif Rosli, a research associate at the Institute, and I will be your host and moderator for today. Before we proceed, I would like to apologize beforehand for some background noise that you might hear from my side, as there are renovation works happening in my apartment building as we speak. Having said that, I'm sure this minor inconvenience will not distract us from engaging in a robust discussion that we have at hand. Today's book talk centers on Dr. Sumanto Al Qurtuby's book titled Saudi Arabia and Indonesia Networks, Migration, Education and Islam. Since the 1990s, academics and researchers on Indonesian intellectual history have traced the development of Islamic thought and discourse through personalities, institutions, and social policies. For example, Professor Azumardi Azra, arguably one of, if not the most celebrated scholar on Indonesian Islam today, has written on the networks of Malay, Indonesian, and Middle Eastern ulama, or Muslim scholars, in the 17th and 18th centuries. Equally important is the work of Mona Abaza, who had researched Indonesian students in Cairo and charted the roles they play in shaping modern Islamic studies in Indonesia. On top of that, Robert Hefner and Yudi Latif have also contributed to the field through their assessment of politics, activism, and Islamic thought in Indonesia. Dr. Sumanto's book, which is the focus of today's book talk, has opened up a new avenue for academic discussion as it examines Indonesian educational migrants and intellectual travelers in Saudi Arabia, including students, researchers, teachers, and scholars, to provide a unique portrait of the religious and intellectual linkages between the two countries. It also identifies the Indonesian legacy in Saudi Arabia and examines how the host country's influential Islamic scholars have impacted Indonesian Muslims. The book sheds light on the dynamic history of Saudi Arabian-Indonesian relations and the intellectual impact of Indonesian migrants in Saudi Arabia. So a word on our speaker and discussant for today. Dr. Sumanto is no stranger to the Middle East Institute at NUS. In fact, part of the book that we are discussing today was actually written when he was a visiting senior research fellow at the Institute. Dr. Sumanto will later present on his book for about 20 to 25 minutes. Afterwards, Dr. Nur Shahril will provide some insights and perspectives on the book for about 15 to 20 minutes, whereby he will reflect on how Dr. Sumanto's book can be situated into other Southeast Asian contexts before we segue into the question and answer session. So without further ado, I hand over the session to Dr. Sumanto. Dr. Sumanto, please.
Okay, Fauzan, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen first, yeah? Wait a second. Okay, Fauzan, can you see it?
Yes, Dr. Sumanto, yes, we can see it.
The slide, so, okay, now it's my. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, the Middle East Institute for organizing this book talks, which is I do really appreciate for this, and and for me, of course, this is a very important talk about this. I think this is the second or the third book talk about my previous books, and before I mentioned several things about this book. I think, as Fauzan mentioned before, that this book is actually was written, and majority of the content of this book was written during my visiting fellowship the Middle East Institute. So this is why I I dedicated this book to the former director of the Middle East Institute, which is the late Professor Peter Slaglet, actually, who was the director at the time, and before Pa Eng Seng, who took his position. And also the book, I dedicated this book to the late Professor Augustus Richard Norton, who was also specialist of the Middle East studies, just like Professor Peter Slaglet. So thanks again for organizing this, and also thanks again for the Middle East Institute to the leadership of the Middle East Institute, like Michelle, for example. I have no idea if Michelle is here or not, and other leadership and staff in the Middle East Institute. So, okay, I'm going to talk about what exactly this book is about. This book is basically the key concept, the key themes of focus that for this book. Actually, the first focus of this book is we talk about the historical dynamic and contemporary development of the bilateral relations between Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. What I mean by bilateral relations is because my background was cultural anthropology, my background was not political science. So what I mean by bilateral relations here is people-to-people relations. It's not about government-to-government relations, which is different from political science perspective or from international relations specialists, for example, which more focused on G2G relationships. And this book also doesn't focus on business-to-business relationship, for example, between Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. So the focus of this book is the relationship between people to people. Okay, which is as I said in the book, it has a long history. Long history, and the book is not only discussed about the previous history of this relationship between Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, quote by quote. I wrote quote by quote because Saudi Arabia was not born yet before 1932, and Indonesia was not born yet before 1945. So, but to make it easy, let's see Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. So this is the first theme on the first focus. The second focus of this book is to talk about the complex role of Saudi Arabia's Islamic educational institutions, which is what I mean here. Educational institution is both formal or informal. Formal, for example, like universities, Saudi Arabia's universities, for example, or informal, like Ma'had, or maybe Rubat or Ribat might be the Islamic school, which is typical Islamic school for Islamic studies in Saudi Arabia, or or the institution. It could be, it's not only in Saudi Arabia, it could be also in Jakarta, for example, like Libya. Libya is the Arabic Studies and Islamic Studies institutions in Jakarta has been built. I think was built in 1980, which is this institution was actually a branch of Al-Imam Muhammad bin Saud Islamic University in Riyadh. So what I mean by Saudi Arabia's Islamic educational institution, it could be in Saudi Arabia, it could be in Indonesia, or could be formal or informal. So the second topic is talk about this, about the role, the contributions of this is Saudi Arabia Islamic learning centers in shaping thoughts and practices of Indonesian students and alumni. So this is the second focus. And the last focus of this book, I discussed in this book, is about the intellectual trajectory and the shifting nature of Indonesian scholars, scientists, teachers, and students. So let's say educational travelers and migrants, or some say transnationals, from past to present. So this is the main focus of this book. So look at a very quick facts before we discuss more detail about this book. Look at the very quick facts about the bilateral connection between Indonesia and Saudi Arabia. To those who might be not familiar with this, so actually bilateral connection or bilateral relation between Saudi Arabia and Indonesia is actually not new. It has been long history. So Saudi Arabia was among the first countries to recognize Indonesia's independence, for example, in 1945, in addition to Egypt. Yeah, if you look at the Middle East, yeah, Egypt, Saudi Arabia was among the first countries that recognized Indonesian independence. Indonesia's Saudi ties were initiated formally in 1948, yeah, with the founding of the Indonesian embassy in Jeddah, and Jeddah is close to Mecca. And then 2 years later, the Saudi representative office was set up in Jakarta, which was upgraded in 1955 to a formal embassy during the King Saud. In 1955, the King Ibn Saud already dead and replaced by his son, which is King Saud. So this is the formal connection between Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. But we have to remember this. However, although the formal connection between Saudi Arabia and Indonesia began only with post-independent Indonesia, for example, but the informal context, informal connections started centuries ago, long before Indonesia gained independence in 1945, yeah, and long before the Saudi Arabia established modern kingdom in 1932. So this is, if we look at the formal connection, it's just long before Indonesia independent and before Saudi Arabia founded modern kingdom. And then and then we have also from historical record, we also noticed that in late 1920s, for example, the delegation of Nahdlatul Ulama, which is Indonesia's largest Muslim organization at the time, met King Ibn Saud, which is the founding fathers of modern Saudi kingdom, to discuss any religious issues. What kind of issues at the time they discussed, which is actually related to several Islamic madhab, which is at the time when King Ibn Saud would like to include Mecca to be part of the modern kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So some Islamic scholars of Nahdlatul Ulama, they're worried about the new policy that might be replace the Islamic practices in Mecca, which is they were afraid that the new king will replace all madhab has been practiced there by the Hanbali madhab, which is the madhab as embraced by the kingdom. So they negotiate about this. So to make sure that all madhab within the Sunni traditions is to make sure that the king allow teaching practices or learning practices all madhab, Hanafi, Shafi'i, and Maliki and others, is not only Hanbali madhab. So this is the key point for the discussion between delegation of Nahdlatul Ulama, scholars from Nahdlatul Ulama, and the late King Ibn Saud at the time. So it's already in late 20s, 1920s. So look at more detail about informal connection between Mecca and Saudi, and between Mecca and Indonesia, for example. Since centuries ago, many centuries, there is no exact time when exactly the Indonesian first traveled to Hijaz or Mecca. There is no exact times, but we can recognize from historical record that since many centuries ago, actually, Indonesian Muslims visited Mecca for two main purposes. Mecca at the time was not belong to Saudi kingdom yet. At the time, Mecca was under Ottoman, also Turkey Osman is not part of the kingdom of Saudi Arabia yet at the time. So Indonesian Muslim visited Mecca for two main reasons. First, for Hajj pilgrimage. This is for obvious reason. The second was for Islamic learning. Performing Hajj as one of Islam's five pillars here has been one of central religious ritual for Muslims. Of course, there's no question about this, but for Indonesian Muslims, it's been very special. Performing Hajj is not only to fulfill the ones of Islam's five pillars, but also this to escalate, to elevate their social status, their prestige, their pride in the society. Because if they have Hajj in front of their name, it can it can move up their social status, prestige, and pride in the society, and can be used for political reason, for economic things, and so on and so forth. So some Indonesian Muslims also perform Hajj also for gaining or enforcing what they call kesaktian. Saktian might be for Malay, you're familiar with the word kesaktian, or maybe those who have Sanskrit origin, Sakti. Sakti is kind of a supernatural divine power. So for some Indonesian Muslims, this is according to some studies by anthropologists. So there are some Indonesians perform Hajj also to reinforce or to gain kesaktian. Because they visited the most sacred places in Islam, like Hajar Aswad, Kaabah. It's considered to be the most sacred places for them. So this is why performing Hajj is also important for them. So this is the fact. So interestingly, so even though they're facing many difficulties, maybe if you read the history of Hajj Indonesia to Mecca at the time, they need 6 months one way. They need 6 months, and on the way back, and of course they need more 6 months. So that's mean 1 hour journey, voyage in the sea, 1 hour. So it's become very, very dangerous journey actually. Treacherous seas, disease, so many diseases at the time, like cholera, for example, and also theft, robbery. It happened at the time. Limited food resources, of course, and so on and so forth. This is very, very difficult time. However, even though the journey is very difficult, the number of Indonesian Hajj pilgrims in the past centuries was extensive. It was interesting. Snoek was a Dutch advisor for Islamic issues during the Dutch colonial period at the time. Snoek was living in Hijaz in the 19th century. Snoek lived in Hijaz, and he estimated between 1850 and 1860, there were about 1,600 Indonesian Hajj pilgrims in this year. Indonesian pilgrim, and about 2,600 until 4,600 pilgrims in the 1870s and 1880s. About 50% at the time, all pilgrims to Mecca in the 19th century were from the Indonesian archipelago. It's a very enormous, it's very interesting thing to discuss. So the increase, the Hajj become increased at the time because steamship technology also. The opening of Suez Canal in 1869, so this made Mecca more accessible. And this resulted in the increase of Indonesians and pilgrim. And in the end of the 19th century, this according to Snoek, according to him, is about 8,000 until 10,000 Indonesians ventured for Hajj. It's very, very interesting. And many of them settled in Mecca, and they created what we call Kampung Jawa, or the Javanese village. But the word Jawa, the word Jawa at the time was not only referred to Javanese island, which is now we understand what Javanese is, what Java island is. The word Jawa at the time referred to Malay, close to Malay Indonesian archipelago. Actually, those who live in this area, or Southeast Asia, now we understand it. We call it Kampung Jawa, which is very interesting and still exists until now, this Kampung Jawa. So after performing Hajj in past centuries, so some return to Indonesia, some return to, again, I use quote by quote here, return to Indonesia, but some others, they chose to stay in Mecca for two main reasons. The first reason why they chose Mecca, they needed money. They needed money either to purchase provisions to return to Indonesia or to pay their debt. Yeah, because long journey, so they need more money, and sometimes they run out of provisions or money, and then they borrow or loan money from others, so they need to stay to pay their debts. So there will be some of them because of this reason, some of them They took jobs, maybe in the plantation. Some of them work in small shops. Some of them work as an assistant, what by was as assisted pilgrim to get money. But some, because of they cannot pay their debt, so they become a slave. Yeah, they become slave. So please remember, in Makkah at the time, there is no, many people live in Mecca. It's not necessarily Arab. It could be from Africa. It could be from South Asian. It could be from, it could be Turkish. It could be any ethnic groups there, because Mecca is an open place, melting pot for many ethnic groups. It's not necessarily Arab. It could be ethnic groups from other tribal societies. It could be Berbers and others, and so on and so forth. Whoever lived in Hijaz at the time was a very enormous group of people. And then the second reason why they chose to stay in Mecca, the second reason, they wanted to study, to learn the Islamic science, while simultaneously they performing ritual at the Haram Mosque or Masjid Haram, and then a Nabawi Mosque or Masjid Nabawi in Medina. So it's very obvious reason. For Muslims, journey for seeking knowledge, which is called rihlah, journey for seeking knowledge, is part of ibadah or worship, religious ritual. To get what? To get barakah. It is actually true for Indonesian Muslims. They study from place to place, because it's not only to get knowledge, not only to get skill, not only to want to get knowledge or skill, but also they want to get God's blessings, Allah blessing, for example. And it's become very special if they could pursue such Islamic knowledge and science in the birthplace of Islam and Prophet Muhammad, which is Makkah. Has become very important place, of course, for them. So if they could study in Makkah, learn in Makkah, so they not only to get knowledge of Islam, Islamic knowledge of science, but also they will get God's blessings. And Mecca has been very special places for them. So they believe if they died in Mecca, they will get guaranteed to get entrance to heaven, for example, and so forth. So this, until now, many Indonesians living in Mecca is because they consider Mecca as a second home, according to the Masjid, which is important until now. Many people still live there and would like to die there. And many Islamic scholars actually died in Makkah, because they consider if died in Makkah, so they will enter to Jannah, enter to heaven according to their belief. So resulting from this learning process, okay, there were a great number of Islamic Indonesian scholars and teachers in the Haramain. The Haramain. What I mean by Haramain here is Makkah and Medina. Yeah, this is the word. The word used, Haramain means Makkah and Medina. Many of them, enormous number of Indonesian Islamic scholars and teachers. And some of them, they established Islamic schools in Makkah, for example, like Madrasah Darul Ulum in 1934. This is some group of Indonesian scholars. They established Madrasah Darul Ulum there. And some of them established Madrasah Indonesia Al-Makiyah in 1947, for example, or Madrasah Kutab Al-Banat. This is specific for women. This is also established in 1942. Actually, they established a Madrasah for women in 1932 in Makkah. Those established this was the Siti Khouria. Her name is Siti Khouria. She was the daughter of Sheikh Hashim Ash'ari, which is the founder of Nahdlatul Ulama I mentioned earlier. So the first Islamic schools, Madrasah for women, and Makkah at that time was established by Siti Khouria, the daughters of and others. It's not only her or him, but also others. Also, you can read it from the books. So since 17th, 18th century, a number of Indonesian Islamic scholars, teachers, and Sufi masters who resided in Makkah and Medina, they call them Mukimin. They had been teaching there, either in mosque, in Haram Mosque, Masjid Haram, or Masjid Nabawi. They was teaching there in Zawiyah, for example, or Sophiologists, in Rubat, for example, or Ma'had, for example, this is referred to in formal religious or Islamic schools, or in Madrasah, a formal Islamic school. They were there not only teaching Malay Indonesian pilgrim at the time, but also foreign students South Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, and so on and so forth. This has been very, very enormous. So this is an example of scholar. The name of scholar, Indonesian scholars, lived in Mecca at the time and was teaching there at the time. So this is just example, the complete list name you can find in the book. So the first stage of Indonesian Islamic scholars in Arabia, and this is in 17th century until 18th century, you can name it this. Very great scholars, Nuruddin Al-Amiri, Abdurrahman Singkili, Yusuf Makassari, Samsuddin Sumatrani, Hamzah Famsuri, and many others. So this is a product of Indonesia, of Islamic learning institutions in Makkah. And this scholars was the subject of the study of Professor Azumardi Azra, which is Fauzan mentions earlier. So Professor Azra focused on the study of social biography of these Islamic scholars, which has been learning, but also some of them teaching also in Makkah at the time, between 17 and 18. And in 19th century and 20th century also, there's a great number of Islamic scholars live in Makkah also. And learning, not only learning, but also teaching. So some of them are very prolific Islamic scholar. For example, like Muhammad Nawawi, like Imam Nawawi, for example, is a very prolific scholar, writing many books, many risalah, many treatise, Islamic treatise. Ahmad Khatib Minangkabau is just very excellent and written many books. K. Mahmud Termas, for example, and others, and so forth, you can name it. This has been the subjects of a study of Professor Abdurrahman, for example, and Basri, for example, also used this Islamic network of Islamic scholars as a major study of their dissertation. Professor Azur Mazdi Arzira wrote this dissertation at Columbia University, which is focused on 17th and 18th century. But Professor Abdurrahman Masud and Basri was also in 1997, he wrote dissertations also on these Islamic scholars. He wrote dissertation for, I think, in University of Arkansas in the US. Professor Abdurrahman Masud, he wrote dissertation on these scholars also in University of UCLA, California in Los Angeles. This is has been it's just most a small example. I also mentioned name and some social biography of them in my books. Okay, so this is what I mean. This is just a small picture. This is what I mentioned before. Azumardi Azra, his dissertation in 1992. We talk about its Indonesian Islamic scholars, has been published by I think it's published by Hawaii University of Hawaii Press, I think. And this is, they were an example of Islamic scholars in Makkah. In Makkah was the founder. This Syekh Yasin in the middle. Syekh Yasin was the one of the founders of a Madrasah Darul Ulum in 1934 in Makkah, which is I mentioned earlier. This is an example of some group of Indonesian Islamic scholars or ulama live in Mecca at the time. This is just small example. And then the natures of Indonesian migrants or transnational was quite changed after post-war World War II. Yeah. After World War II, in addition to Hajj and Umrah pilgrims, Umrah and Hajj still continue until World War II. But Indonesian migration was marked by the presence of at least three groups, which is different from the previous transnational group. Okay, the first group, those who seeking unskilled manual labor, like housemaids, drivers, for example, and skilled professional employment. For example, this is those who work in oil industries, in hotels, construction companies, for example. And in 1987, 83, this is the first time, at the request of the Saudi government, the Indonesians sent about 47,000 documented manual laborers. So this is the first time. The first time the manual laborers came to Saudi under the sponsorship of Indonesian government and at the request of the Saudi government. Okay, and since that year, the number and diversity of the labor grew rapidly. It grew every year, the numbers grew. And the data until 2010, and my record is about close to 1 million. The manual laborers close to 1 million, but because the numbers always increase every year. This is for the manual laborers, but for the skilled professional employees, for example, like researchers, scientists, teachers, are not use Indonesian government sponsor. They usually apply themselves to those who works in companies or in universities, just like me, do not under Indonesian government and not at the request of the Saudi government. We applied directly to the institutions. Okay, this is the difference between manual laborers and the skilled professionals employees. And the second groups was Indonesians, those who studying Islamic science from undergraduate to graduate in Rubat or in Ma'had or in universities, which is different from the previous one. The previous before World War II, most Indonesians, they study in informal, in Masjid Haram, Haram Mosque, or Nabawi Mosque, or other informal Islamic learning centers. But in post-World War II, there's a different Islamic learning centers. In addition to the formal ones, they also study in universities. And the third group is after post-World II is the group Indonesian students, graduate, especially graduate, who study secular science. Secular science, I mean by secular science, was non-Islamic studies. So they study engineering, they study computer science, they study business, they study math, for example, and so on and so forth. They study this. This is the new generation of Indonesian student, Indonesian student, which is obviously missing from the previous one, which is mostly just focused on Islamic studies. But now there's a graduate student that focus on non-Islamic studies. So since 1970s, with the support of Saudi scholarship, so Indonesian Muslim, they began to study Islam in higher educational institution in Saudi Arabia. This is beginning in 1970s, which is three main universities that focus on Islamic studies that mostly many Indonesians study there. Islamic University in Madinah. This is the oldest Islamic university, Islamic University in Madinah, which was established in 1960s. And then after 1980s, Indonesians also, some of them, they studied at Al Qurtuby University and Imam Muhammad bin Saud Islamic University in Riyadh. So this is also under the sponsorship of the Saudi government at the time. But in recent years, the scholarship scheme has changed, have shifted since recent years because of several issues that we can discuss now. So this is the new wave, the new wave of Indonesian educational travelers in Saudi Arabia began to change in 1970s actually. And in 1990s, especially 2000s, a number of Indonesian students also, they pursued scholar science, I mentioned before, for master, doctorate level, and various universities, mostly in King Fahd University of Petroleum and Mineral. This is my university. Now I'm teaching now in this university in King Fahd, Petroleum and Mineral in Dahran. The second is King Saud University in Riyadh, and King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Tual. This is mostly graduate level for master and PhD, which is based on my study from this book. I found these three institutions become the most place where Indonesians study in graduate level, master or PhD. So this is the example of picture of Indonesian current Indonesian students. On the left is students of Islamic studies. This is from Islamic University of Madinah. This is the left. He was studying Islamic studies, and the right was a graduate, master, PhD who studied scholar science. This is in my university in King Fahd University. This is just example of current Indonesian students. And then, okay, that's it. My talks. This is a quick summary of the books. Very brief before I give to Pak Nur Sahril. So the first is about role and contribution of Indonesian Islamic scholars and teachers to Islamic education and Muslim thought and cultural practices in Arabia, which is especially Haramain, in past century, as well as Indonesia, from past to now. So my notice was, since the death of Sheikh Yassin Padang in 1990, almost no more noted Indonesian scholars in Arabia nowadays. There's no more Indonesian scholars now. I found a few, like Dr. Fahmi, for example. Now he teach at Madrasah Salatiyah, if I'm not mistaken, in Makkah. But it's very, very rare now since the death of Sheikh Yassin in 19. So he is. I think he is the last noted influential famous Islamic scholars living in Mecca is Sheikh Yassin. He wrote many books, and very prolific orators. He was also the main. He is also one of the founders of a female education in Mecca, which is Sheikh Yassin, and his wife also the sponsors, one of the sponsors for Islamic educations in Mecca. Yeah. So since the death of Sheikh Yassin, is almost no more Indonesian Islamic scholars in the Haramain. And then the second quick summary is about the changing nature of education for Indonesian in Saudi Arabia before and after the founding of the modern kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The changing nature of education mean in the past some studying mostly on Islamic studies, but now Indonesians not only studying Islamic studies, but also many of them studying secular science or non-Islamic studies. And then another thing that the book says, the quick summary here, the plurality of alumni of Saudi educational institution, which is Islamic and non-Islamic studies, conservative and moderate, and so forth. This plurality of it is a very enormous groups of people. And then the variety of Indonesian migrants or transnational in Saudi Arabia. The variety means here in terms of backgrounds, in terms of professions, in terms of religions. For example, it's not only Muslims now. It's not the migrant. It's not many people maybe think that Indonesians migrants in Saudi is Muslims. Well, in fact, not. It's not all of the Muslims. Many of them non-Muslims. That's include my colleague here. There was non-Muslims also, Indonesian non-Muslim who teach here in the kingdom. So this is the quick summary. So the last point is the key theoretical findings. So what exactly the key theoretical findings here? So although the book underlines the social and religious dimensions, important factors shaping the dynamic of Saudi-Indonesian relations, so the book suggests the two countries' ties as fundamentally consistent with the realist emphasis on state calculation, with each country aiming at maximizing its own national interest. The second point is religion and people-to-people connection or ties nonetheless play a key role in the connections, establishing historical patterns, influencing how the two countries assess each other's impact on their national interests, and shaping how the two countries see each other government and societies today. And then the last one, while religion is not the primary driving force behind Saudi-Indonesian foreign relations, because there are many reasons of factors that contribute to this foreign relations, but Islam is of course a very important factor. And this religion shaped many aspects of the bilateral connections, including education, trade, employment, business, pilgrimage, and so on. No question about this. Last but not least, this is the book's weaknesses. Before Pak Nur Sahril criticized my book, I'm going to criticize myself. So several weaknesses of this book is, the first is a lack of explanation on the role and contribution of graduates or alumni of non-Islamic studies, as well as their opinion about Islam and Saudi society that might differ from those of Islamic studies alumni. It could be, but I do not have chance to explore this more detail in the book. It could be very useful and enormous contribution if we could if we could highlight or underline their contributions, explain their rules, and after finishing their studies in the kingdom. And that the book also lack of description on the root causes and contemporary intellectual contest and debate between conservative and moderate factions of alumni of Saudi Arabia's educational institution. Well, I mentioned several groups of moderate alumni and several group conservative alumni, but I do not discuss deeply about this contest, the intellectual contest, what the root causes of this contest, and so on and so forth. And that's it, gentlemen. So if you like this book, you can see on Google and you can see on Amazon. You can directly contact the publisher. It don't mind for me. You would like to read or not, as long as you buy, it's okay for me. It doesn't matter you would like to read or not of the book. And here that's it. So this is a quote from Ibnu Battuta, yes, which is also very important for us. Battuta is yeah. So that's it, Fauzan, from my side, and I give Dr. Sahril to criticize, give some opinions to my book. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sumanto, for providing the outline of your book, as well as a specific or main arguments rather that you made in the book. I think it has given us some food for thought before we go into a question and answer session later on. But for now, I would like to invite Dr. Nur Shahrial Saad to provide his insights on the book. Dr. Nur Shahrial, please.
Thank you, Fauzan. Thank you for inviting me. And thanks also to MEI for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to be a discussant of this book. First and foremost, congratulations to Dr. Sumanto Al Qurtuby for this very insightful publication. On the contrary, I will not be criticizing you. I personally like the book, though I must admit that I read the book quickly. It's fast reading, but I really benefited a lot and learned a lot based on what I've read so far. Why the interest in this topic? When Fauzan first asked me to do this, I'm not sure whether I'm the right person to be the discussant, but certainly I have a strong interest in looking at Middle East impact in Southeast Asia. Previously, I've looked at Singapore students traveling to the Middle East. One of the books that I have published, a short monograph, in fact, was looking at Singapore students in Al-Azhar University. Very, very recently, I also embarked on a separate study, and Fauzan is part of this study as well, looking at the Islamic studies graduates from Singapore, and bulk of them from the madrasas actually go to the Middle East. Of course, the more popular destination would be Egypt, followed by Jordan, increasingly, in fact. But a sizable number of our students in Singapore actually go to Saudi Arabia, particularly Islamic University of Medina. And hence, I think this is how I'm going to shape my discussion today. Rather than focusing so much on the book, I would like to share with you some of my work, some of the data that I've gathered from my work. So as I was reading Dr. Sumanto's book on Indonesia, Saudi Arabia relations, particularly dealing with students, I was also reflecting on the content of my own project, the data that I've gathered, particularly how it deals with Singapore students. And I think this is a basis for me to compare and contrast the situation. And perhaps we can have a better discussion later when we compare the situation amongst Indonesian students as well as Singapore students. So I will focus less on the theoretical framework, which Dr. Sumanto have discussed extensively in his book, The Rihla. I will not go into that, but my discussion will be more centered along what concerns Islam and Muslims in Southeast Asia. Of course, Indonesia is one largest country in the largest Muslim country in the world. But I also want to look and compare and contrast the situation in Singapore and also in Malaysia. And more importantly, the significance of Saudi Arabian Islam for Singapore, particularly addressing some of the concerns of not only academics, but also policymakers here in Singapore. When we talk about Saudi Arabia, when we talk about Middle East, often we think about security issues, particularly the talk of the town now is Arabization, how the Malays here in Singapore and also in Southeast Asia are beginning to lose their own cultural roots and identity. This includes their language, their fashion, their habits, and giving more privilege to Middle East culture. For instance, we don't use Malay words to describe our culture anymore. We tend to replace them with Arabic words. So that's one of the concerns of policymakers as well as academics. The second one has been a long-standing issue when we discuss Singapore-Saudi Arabia form of relations, the importation of Salafi Wahhabism, which is associated with Puritan ideas. This is not a new issue. If you study Indonesian Islam, of course, we have the kaum muda, kaum tua debate, the Sumatra situation that leads to the modernist movement. So this is not a new issue, but lately there's been a lot of talk about Saudi Arabia exporting the Salafi Wahhabi idea. And I think we can gather a lot from Dr. Sumanto's publication, particularly pertaining to the discovery of oil and the petrodollars that was being exported, and also the geopolitical situation, the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, which exports the Salafi Wahhabi ideology. And the third concern would be the graduates of IUM. This one, I think Singaporeans, policymakers are quite interested because we have quite a number of students in Medina. And based on my study, I think this is a very interesting category altogether compared to the other students who actually studied in Singapore madrasas. So there are certain traits and certain features which I will discuss later in my presentation. Yeah, so my talk will not be so directly be responding to Dr. Sumanto's book. If you ask me to grade his book, I would say read it. It's a very good book. Yeah. Right. Some key discussions that I wish to raise in my talk today. And this, of course, is very much inspired by what Dr. Sumanto has done in his book as I was reflecting. And again, it comes from my personal experience. First time I actually traveled to Saudi Arabia was to perform the Umrah, and this was in 2003, almost 15 years ago, yeah, more than that. I came with a Singapore group, and when I was in Mecca, I was greeted by an Indonesian who has stayed in Mecca. Apparently, this person is called the Mutawif, the person who actually brings pilgrims around and circling the Kaaba. And this person is Indonesian. So he has worked with this Singapore company for decades, actually. So it gave me the opportunity to actually speak to this Ustaz, who has been guiding Singapore pilgrims. Apparently, he was from Banjarmasin in South Kalimantan. And the reason why he's interesting is because I was observing the rituals which he conducted and why the Singapore agency was very comfortable with this Ustaz. The rituals that he conducted was very much Shafi'i school of thought, very close to Singapore Muslims orientation. He performed rituals which are very close to traditionalists, very Nahdlatul Ulama type, which makes it makes the reason why he's selected. So when we ask him why he decided to stay in Saudi Arabia, he shared that actually the main reason why he came to Saudi Arabia was to find work first, and then to also study religion. But then he continued studying informally, not in any university, but he found work with the Singapore agency, and it's a very lucrative thing, and he survived based on that. So that actually developed an interest for me to find out more about this community. And he shared that there is a very huge Banjar community in Saudi Arabia. And if you visit Mecca, for instance, they are the ones who have been running this Mutawif business and providing these services to Southeast Asian pilgrims. Yeah, so I think this is what I get it from Dr. Sumanto's work as well. Some people travel to Saudi Arabia mainly for work. This is temporary, for pilgrimage, and some of them are mainly students, right? That's why they actually studied. They went to Saudi Arabia, but some actually stayed on a bit longer. This is a more permanent form of traveling for work, and they actually form communities, and they also built families in Saudi Arabia. So there are multiple reasons. So just to share, before I met this ustaz in Saudi, the perception that I gather about Saudi Arabia is that it's Wahhabi Salafi, it's very Puritan, it's very backward. But as you go there, you step your foot in Mecca, you step your foot in Saudi Arabia, and things are different from what we actually read. And I think Dr. Sumanto's work also tries to deconstruct this whole perception that Saudi Arabia is backward, is homogeneous, and all that. I think that's very useful perspective. The second dimension that I wish to discuss is the Indonesia-Saudi relations, particularly the impact on Southeast Asian Islam. As I mentioned earlier, I think the image that we gather is that it's very much Salafi Wahhabi, which is true, is a dominant ideology in Saudi Arabia. But if you go deeper down, as you read Dr. Sumanto's work, there are schools mainly catered for Southeast Asian. There are schools and ulama who mainly teaches other schools of thought, though they are mainly lying low because of the certain political situation in Saudi Arabia. And certainly we have to look at the contributions of Indonesians in Southeast Asia to Saudi Arabian Islam. Rather than always focusing that Middle East is impacting Southeast Asia, we also need to relook at this discourse and say that no, actually Southeast Asia too have a significant impact on Saudi Arabian Islam. Though, of course, there are certain periods where they are more dominant, and I think at this point of time, maybe the time is not ideal for them to actually come back to the surface. But as I will discuss later, Saudi Arabia today is also undergoing significant changes, and we might see a change in the near future. The third point that I gather from Dr. Sumanto's book is that if you want to study Saudi Arabia, or you want to study Islam in the Middle East, you don't have to only look at the ideology or the teachings of Islam. You also need to look at geopolitical competition that happened in the Middle East. The context of the fall of Ottoman Empire was really spot on by Dr. Sumanto. I think he was looking at that ideological competition, that history, that Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah were actually competing in Indonesia, and they were also trying to get patrons in the Middle East, and one went to Saudi, the other went to Egypt. This shows that there were tensions in the Middle East that actually shaped Southeast Asian Islam. And of course, this competition will constantly shape Southeast Asian Islam as well. If you look at the contemporary context, the competition with Egypt is one. The other is, of course, currently is the competition between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this will definitely play out and shape not only Southeast Asian Islam, but also global Islam. All right, so this is a bit promotion that this is a book that is going to come up this month. It's based on my study with my colleagues Azhar Ibrahim and Noor Aisha. Maybe later I can invite Dr. Sumanto to review my book and share some of his insights. But we were interested to look at Singapore Islamic Studies students in general, and one country is Saudi Arabia. Why Saudi Arabia? So if you ask the students from Singapore, why Saudi Arabia? Of course, the more popular destinations would be Egypt, Malaysia, and Jordan, as I mentioned earlier. Surprisingly, not Indonesia. But why Indonesia? That's why I began to compare what Dr. Sumanto shared earlier. Some of the things actually resonate with my findings. Holy Land, the fact that it's close to Mecca. We have ulamas who are based in Mecca. They can perform their Umrah and Hajj easily. The other reason is that there are opportunities for informal learning. So if you go to the mosque in Masjid Nabawi in Medina, you can actually sit and listen to lectures in a form of closed circles, and then you can gain insights and knowledge. The most common argument for Singapore students is that the scholarship is very lucrative. Everything is paid for. You cannot work in Saudi Arabia because the government doesn't allow you to do that, but it's enough for you to survive, and you don't have to worry so much about taking care of yourself, right? Some of them say that housing is also provided. But the most important reason why Singapore students go to Saudi Arabia is that they don't really need a madrasah background. You know, Singapore, we have madrasas or Islamic primary school and secondary schools. So most of the students who actually enroll into these schools will actually eventually go to an Islamic university in Al-Azhar University or in Malaysia, Malaysian universities and also. But you don't need that madrasah background to be enrolled in Saudi Arabian universities. All you need to show is that you can speak a bit of Arabic, you show interest, and your scholarship is being funded by the Saudi Arabian government. So that's another pull factor, yeah, why Singaporeans go to Saudi Arabia. So I encountered cases of students or undergraduates who are studying in Singapore universities, quit the university, decided to go to Saudi Arabia to study, and the government funds such cases, which makes it more interesting for them. So there's been a lot of interest on Saudi Arabian influence in Singapore. The key concerns amongst policymakers is that its association with Salafi Wahhabism or Puritanism, the security situation in the Middle East, and as Dr. Sumanto pointed out in his book, of course, the dominant ideology in Saudi Arabia is the Hanbali Mazhab, whereas in Southeast Asia it's mainly Shafi'i. How are they able to integrate when they come back upon their return? So this is another concern. The last concern is about jobs of these graduates when they come back, especially in Singapore mosques. You know, Singapore mosques are mainly Sufi oriented. They do the zikir, they do the maulud. Where can we place, Salafi, Wahhabi trained ulama? This is a perception. Now, of course, this is something that we can argue. So jobs for them, but there are also positive aspects of studying in Saudi Arabia. Firstly, those who came back actually make connections in Saudi Arabia, so they become very successful businessmen, especially in handling Hajj and Umrah pilgrims. So the connection matters, and they know the place. So they always make these connections, and later they pursue this business. Some actually go to Saudi Arabia not to study religion, as Dr. Sumanto pointed out. They study the sciences, but I noticed that some of them actually went to Saudi Arabia to establish business connections and to study Islamic banking. I hear of such cases. So they make these connections. It's mainly not so much religious reasons, but also for business and also for other reasons. And the other positive aspect about students from Medina, compared to the other universities that I've studied, is that they are very passionate to become religious teachers. I think their minds are very set, because I think the reason is that they made the decision to become a religious teacher at the later part of their lives. Some of them were in the late secondary schools, some of them were in the JCs, the colleges, and also in some in the university. So they decided to become a religious teacher. They cannot enroll to Al-Azhar. They cannot enroll to Jordan. So what they do, Saudi Arabia is the best destination because they actually allowed and take us with full scholarship. So they become passionate religious teachers when they come back, because their minds were set later part in their lives. So these are some of the positives and some of the concerns. All right, I will just wrap up this section. I hope there's enough for discussion later. Some concluding remarks and observations based on Dr. Sumanto's book. First is factors that shape Islamic orientation. I think Dr. Sumanto's book is very useful in underlying the complexity of this Saudi Arabia influence. if you look at Indonesian students studying in Saudi Arabia, as correctly pointed out by Dr. Sumanto, and I share this observation myself, those Indonesians who went to Saudi and came back, they are not necessarily Puritans. In fact, I read some of their works, I met some of these people. They are far from being Puritans. They are really, really progressive scholars. Said Agil Siraj from if I'm not mistaken, Qura. I don't know, I may be wrong on that. Khalid Nafis, Muhammad Ibn Rahmat, a human rights activist at Ulama, who I met. And I'm surprised that, actually I didn't know this, but I'm surprised that Dr. Sumanto said that he was a graduate from Saudi Arabia. Totally a very progressive scholar, right? So what explains that? What explains these Indonesians who went there, came back, and they're not conservatives, they're not Puritans, they are very progressive? I think it's got to do with the system in Indonesia itself. So you can't really blame Saudi Arabia. We have to relook at this whole idea of Saudi Arabia as promoting Salafism, Wahhabism. Because if the institutions, the local institutions are strong in embedding that progressive thinking from the start before they make their way to Saudi Arabia, then I think the Saudi Arabian impact is not there. Yeah, so the other part is that we also need to look at who the students in Saudi Arabia mingle with. And I think Dr. Sumanto raised this point as well. They mix with different groups, they have different social circles of friends. That photo that Dr. Sumanto shared earlier, I haven't seen that previously, but when he showed it, the thing that came to my mind was that one picture showed students in their, in their very Islamic, their white skull cap, but the other picture is batik, which is quite interesting. That observation, it could be the circle of friends, and what is acceptable in the particular circle of friends in Saudi Arabia. So which professional groups do they mingle with? Which state in Saudi Arabia did they go to? People tend to think of Saudi Arabia as one country that is homogeneous. If you go to, I haven't been to Riyadh, but if you step your foot in Jeddah, which borders Mecca, it's a totally different society altogether. So we need to really be careful when we discuss Saudi Arabia. I think I mentioned the other point about geopolitical rivalry and how it's impacting our understanding of Saudi Arabia. And my last point here is that Saudi Arabia itself is undergoing change. I read Saudi newspapers, the English ones, almost every day. If you read the Saudi Arabia papers, right, the discussions are less about religion. And you'll be surprised, what is allowed to feature in those newspapers. About women's rights, technological change, and recently they're talking about heritage and the use of technology to understand heritage. In Singapore, we're not talking like that, but Saudi Arabia is already talking like that. I think they are more advanced when it comes to this aspect. So society itself is changing. And just want to share with you, before the borders closed, before this COVID-19 hit, I was in Saudi. I performed my Umrah again. This was in 2020, February. It's a totally different society. When I entered when I came to the airport, for the first time, I've been there a few times. For the first time, I was greeted by female who are actually manning the immigration. This has never happened before. So that's another change. At the hotels, the counters, the receptions, it used to be male, but this is my last visit, they're actually females. So I think the society is beginning to change. It's slow. I mean, it was only 10 years ago that maybe they started to have internet access. I still remember in 2008, when I was performing my Hajj, I had problems getting internet access, which I cannot even bid for my modules because I was still a student then. But today, it's like everybody has access to internet and smartphones in Saudi Arabia. It's slow in terms of change, but it is changing. And I think, so we have to be careful when we discuss Saudi. I'm not saying that there's no problems. I'm not saying that Salafism, Wahhabism is gone. What I'm saying is that there are certain forces at play that we need to rethink about Saudi Arabia. I think I'll stop there, and certainly I would welcome questions, but of course the limelight should be for Dr. Sumanto because it's his book. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nusharil, for providing your insights and reflections on Dr. Sumanto's book and situating it in Singapore's context, right? I think it's very timely that we discuss the Southeast Asian context and how Saudi Arabia has actually given a lot of impact on our societies in terms of our religious practices. So we have now come to the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question to our speaker and or discussant, you may use the raise hand function on Zoom and we will invite you to speak directly. At the same time, you may also type in your questions into the Zoom chat box and direct them to MEI events, which I will then read out here. Okay. So to start off, I will actually read out a question posed by Ambassador Zainul Abidin. And this question is directed to Dr. Sumanto. Thank you for the enlightening sharing, Dr. Sumanto. Saudi Arabia is currently undergoing lots of modernizing changes, some controversial. How do you see these developments contributing or complicating Indonesia's efforts at Islam Wasatiyah or moderate Islam?
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I think it will affect in some part of Indonesian cultures and Indonesian Islam, as I mentioned in the book, which is Pak Nur Sahril also pointed out in his observations that there is several streams of Indonesian Islam, which is far away from monolithic groups, and I think the cultural change what happening in the kingdom. In terms of cultures and also perception about religions and others, I think will make a good impact on Indonesian society. Well, in fact, we have we established the ambassador, Indonesian ambassador in the kingdom, which is also who was also my friend actually, Mas Agus. He established Saunesia. Saunesia is a concept to bridge between Indonesia and Saudi Arabia to discuss a common platform regarding Islamic moderation and so forth. And what happened in Saudi, which is actually the same thing in Indonesia now. In Saudi, they promote moderation, which is the moderation happened in Saudi. My observation was actually not only recent phenomena, which actually already took place since the late King Abdullah, actually, since he was on the throne in 2005. He already, even before the late of King Abdullah became the king, he initiated many moderation within the kingdom. So I would say that the moderation, Islamic moderations within the Saudi Arabia was started since King Abdullah, and then of course now it's become more and more excellent development. And this also connect, the same thing happened in Indonesia. They promote Wasatiyah Islam. Wasatiyah Islam is actually the same thing, like Islamic moderation. So the both government, Indonesian government and Saudi government now in the same platform, in the same page. Those promote Islamic moderations because they believe that it is through moderations that can transform society to become modern society. It is through moderation. So this is the belief that has been practiced by Saudi government or Indonesian governments. But the societies might be different things. The society, we have to talk about between state and society, between government and non-government agencies. For non-government agencies, it could be different. It could be multi-layers. It's not unified. It's not monolithic, because if we talk about the society in Indonesia, it could be, some of them might be welcome the ideas of moderation, but some of them might be not welcome the idea of moderations, because idea of moderations might be was thinking moderations might be not as part of the true Islamic belief for some people, but for other people, of course not. If we talk about society, Indonesian Muslims especially, there's a huge differences. There's huge differences among them. Some of them are very welcome, like Nahdlatul Ulama, of course, is very welcome about the idea of Islamic moderations, but some Salafi groups might be not. But even within the Salafi group, there are various sub-factions. Yeah, there's various subgroup within the Salafi group. Salafi groups also is not unified. There are many within the Salafi grouping. Some of them very conservative, some of them a little bit moderate, some of them are very open to the new ideas. So it's enormously different from case to case. But my point is, the idea of moderation, what's happening in the kingdom, was of course this will affect Indonesian society in general, because they look at the Saudi Arabia as one of the key important countries compared to other countries in the Middle East, like Qatar or Bahrain, Emirates or Egypt, and so forth. Saudi Arabia is a special place because it is here Mecca is located. It is here Medina is located. It is here Masjid al-Haram, Masjid al-Nabawi is located. It's become very special location. So we call it sacred geography in anthropological studies. So this is why we talk about Saudi become very important places for Indonesian society. If change happen here, of course it will impact to the changes in Indonesian society. Even though some group of people, they do not look at what's happening in the kingdom. I know this because some people, there is a contest within Indonesian Muslim. Some of them in the past, they consider Saudi Arabia as a truly Islamic country. But now, because Saudi Arabia moved to moderation, so some of them begin to change. Saudi Arabia is no longer Islamic, so they change the discourse. They change the discourse regarding Saudi Arabia. But this is just, some factions, not the only factions, not the only Islamic Muslim faction what's happening in the countries. So let's see in the future. I don't know. It could be. It depends on how it's not black and white. It depends on the political discourse, political practices. Depend on the contest between progressive groups and conservative group, moderate group and not moderate group, and so forth. So yeah, that's my answer. I hope this answered the question.
Thank you, Dr. Sumanto. We have a question from the audience here, from Philip Brockmay. Could you ask the question, please?
Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There is a recent book, a handbook on Hadith studies, and it describes Al-Fadani, one of the central characters in your book, as the most prominent Musnid or Hadith scholar or transmitter of Isnads of the 20th century. So we could say that Yasin Al-Fadani, he was an important scholar, not just because of his influence in Saudi Arabia, but basically for the whole Muslim world. Unfortunately, I haven't read your book yet, so I would be interested in how much do you know about his influence beyond Saudi Arabian and Indonesian scholars?
Yes, Sheikh Yasin was a very important person. I agree. He's a very important person. The influence is within the. We talk about in the kingdom in the past, because he died in 1990s. Yeah, the influence in the kingdom is of course is connected to the role he played in establishing several madrasas for Islamic and has been influenced had been and he was teaching many Islamic scholars, Indonesian Islamic scholars here, and when they back home Indonesia, they established pesantren and others. I know Sheikh Yassin has been very highly respected scholars by Indonesian Kiais. For example, Kiais was the Islamic scholars, those who like a Muslim cleric who was teaching and founding the Islamic boarding school or pesantren. And if we look at in Indonesia, many of them has been highly, they very much appreciate to the work and to not only to the work but also to the persons of Sheikh Yassin. For example, he made connection with some pesantrens in Rembang, in Pati, and he visited before he died. He visited pesantrens. He visited Indonesian pesantrens from place to place. Yeah, and many great pesantrens in Indonesia is actually, of course, is very much respects to the Sheikh Yassin. Not only Sheikh Yassin, but also Sayyid Maliki, Sayyid Ahmad Maliki. Also, this become very important. Sayyid Ahmad Maliki is, of course, is not Indonesians, but he has a huge connections to Indonesians because Sayyid Maliki, Sayyid Ahmad, Sayyid Maliki, Sayyid Muhammad is become has close connections to Indonesian Islamic scholars as well. So this is I have no idea, but his connections beyond Mecca and Indonesia. But what I understand is Sheikh Yassin Padang, Sheikh Yassin bin Isa Al Fadani of Padang, is an extensive network among Indonesian pesantren. Yeah, but the problem is I have no idea either their books has been translated to Indonesians or not. I have no idea about this. But some work for Imam Nawawi, absolutely yes. I know Imam Nawawi, but of course this is the previous one before Sheikh Yassin. But I'm not sure if Sheikh Yassin's work has been translated into Indonesian and has been used in madrasah or pesantren. I have no idea. Well, I think we need to further research about this. But he is very prolific scholars. I know he's very. In my book, I make list his work and mostly in Arabic. He's writing mostly in Arabic, and most Indonesian scholars in the past, it's not only Sheikh Yassin but also Imam Nawawi, Sheikh Mahfud Termas, Sheikh Ahmad Minangkabau. They all wrote the writings in Arabic, not in Indonesian. Some yes in Malay, but it's in Arabic. But the question is there any scholars who would like to translate this and become into Indonesian and has been used in pesantren and others? I have no idea. I have to discuss more detail because Yassin mostly they live here and died here, and yeah, so their connection is through the students who studied under his So
Dr. Sumanto, sorry, I think I have a follow-up question to that. So looking at Sheikh Yassin and also Sheikh Muhammad bin Alawi al-Maliki, although they are great hadith scholars that are frequented by Indonesian students, and I think this also points to two things. Firstly, the diversity of Indonesian students who frequent these two scholars, who are by and large, I think, not sanctioned by the Saudi kingdom, right? As opposed to their contemporaries like Al-Albani or Ibn Baz, who are also hadith scholars in their own right. So do you have any comment on that in terms of, despite these two figures, Sheikh Yassin and Muhammad bin Alawi being great hadith scholars, how are their relationships? How is their relationship with the state like as opposed to the state-sanctioned scholars?
I mean, the state sanction is only to those who maybe had some political oppositions to the government. For example, if those do not have some direct political opposition, so they are okay. So, for example, Sayyid Muhammad and Sayyid Alawi, Sayyid Muhammad and his son Sayyid Ahmad, now Sayyid Ahmad, still run the school Mahat Alawi in Mecca, still teaching Indonesian students. Many Indonesian students have been teaching under his Mahat. But as long as they only teaching for Islam and others, that's okay. So it's still okay. The same thing like Syekh Yasin, his record, he doesn't have any political opposition to the government. He just teaching as a scholar, and that's it. So I mean, if it doesn't have any direct or confrontative opposition to the religious establishment or political establishment, so that's okay. I mean, it's no problem about this. And also, if we discussed previously, there is some historical trajectory in which the governments also sometimes they embrace Sayyid Muhammad. They embrace Sayyid Muhammad as a partner, as a partner against the groups who against the government. So, for example, in the 1990s, for example, when many very conservative religious scholars in the kingdom, they opposed the government because of the Gulf War, right? The Gulf Wars between Iraq and Kuwait and the Gulf, and the Saudi at the time used the land for the American army. This is actually it's close to my area. Actually, they established a military base here, and many some Islamic scholars and clerics, they disagree with the government's with the government decision to host the American armies in Saudi, and this include the Osama bin Laden network, yeah, so or those who are very conservative group. And then at the time, the government, they make a new coalition with Sayyid Muhammad as a new partner within the kingdom to oppose this group of Islamic scholars who disagree with the decisions of the government. So everything is dynamic, Fauzan. It's not really. It depends on what kind of a dynamics happening. It's not always as it is. It's changing a lot. It's changing. It depends on what kind of a relationships between the political establishment and religious establishment. Sometimes they use this because they beneficial to the government, but if not beneficial to the government, they will oppose. They oppose this. Like for example, even though Osama bin Laden, for example, is Saudis, but very militant like Osama and others, of course, many Saudis will not welcome to them, right? So this is why if not welcome, then they become conflict one another. And it's happened. It's not only in the kingdom actually, but it happened in other countries also. It depends with whom you will follow. You will follow my decision. You will follow my policy or not. If you follow policy, you can behind me. If not, and then make confrontation. So this is what I understand as yeah. So as for Syekh Yasin, he never. As long as I know, no, he was very have no political things, and no, he was. But the case of Syed Ahmad, yes, Syed Ahmad, yes, it's not confrontation with the government, but the government allow them to access this because do not have do not make confrontation to the government or strong religious establishment, which is of course different from other religious scholars. That's it.
We have two more questions from Steve Gaspers. He says here, thank you, Dr. Sumanto and Dr. Sharif, for the very insightful views on different angles, Indonesia and Singapore. A question for Dr. Sumanto. Do you touch an issue on your book about the increasing primordial respect for the so-called Habib groups who are considered as the highest caste in the common Indonesian Muslims? And a question for Dr. Sharif. How can you describe?
Hold on, Fauzan, one by one. The first question is, can you Paraphrase.
You touch an issue on your book about the increasing primordial respect for the so-called Habib groups, the Habibs, who are considered as the highest caste in the ranks of Indonesian society. Indonesian Muslim society, they are considered to be at the top, right? So did you talk about them in your book, how Indonesians revere this Habaib in Indonesian society, and what are their relationship with the Indonesian Muslim society? And just to wrap things up, I will also read out the question for Dr. Nur Sharil here. How can you describe about the Singaporean youth Islamic groups today? Is there any reinforcing movement among the Singaporean youth Muslim groups? So both questions from Steve Gaspers. Maybe Dr. Sumanto, you can go first.
Yeah, for Habaib, no, we do not talk about the Habaib group in the book. The book we mainly discuss about this is as Dr. Sahril and Dr. Nur Sahril mentions, the main point of my book actually to deconstruct the perceptions of many people, which is they consider Saudi as a monolithic group, Saudi alumni as a monolithic group. So which is what happening is very truly diverse groups. Truly diverse group. So this is the main purpose of the book, is to deconstruct the perception, discourse, or belief, or maybe common belief among many people who are not familiar with the Saudi Arabia and Indonesian network. So this is why the book discuss about the alumni of a non-Islamic studies. We discuss about alumni of a Saudi Arabian institution, which is not all of them become very militant Islamic group. Many of them also become, many of them embrace moderation and so on and so forth. So this is among the reasons for the purpose of the book, is to deconstruct people's perception. We do not discuss specifically on the Habaib network, even though Sayyid Ahmed or Sayyid Alawi and his son Sayyid Muhammad and his son Sayyid Ahmed, now Sayyid Ahmed is from the Habaib family. They, of course, they have enormous network in Indonesia, but I also do not discuss this issue. Okay, and even within Habaib also, there are various groups within Habaib. It's not all Habaibs like Shihab, for example. There are various groups within Habaib also, which is I do not mention specifically in this specific book. Maybe another times, maybe if I have time, so to talk about the Habaib networks or Habaib influence, and or maybe study that connected to Habaib. Yeah, that's it, Fauzan. Thank you, Steve. Yes, are you here, Steve? Are you still here, Steve? Thank you so much for the question and for coming for the discussion. Yeah, Steve.
Thank you, bro.
Okay, Dr. Nur Sharil.
Yeah, I just wanted to share also, before I answer that question, also some insights that I gather. I think from this talk, in fact, and it's always a pleasure listening to Dr. Sumanto as well as reading the book. Firstly, I think it's important to before discussing Saudi Arabia, sometimes to set foot in Saudi Arabia is also important. To understand the change in society, to understand the lived realities on the ground, to understand the different parts of Saudi Arabia. I think Dr. Sumanto had the privilege because he's there. But based on some of the visits, short visits that I went to Saudi Arabia, I'm able to see different kind of society nuance and some of the complexities that's happening on the ground. There are problems, as I mentioned earlier, but we should not be casting society as one homogeneous entity. There are also conflicts within them. There are also tensions between them. And regarding the Habaib community, if I may share, again, I didn't travel much in Saudi Arabia, but I do attend some of the events of Habaibs in Singapore, and I noticed there were instances where actually some of them actually came from Saudi Arabia, which shows one thing, that there is a Habaib community in Saudi Arabia. I was quite surprised. There actually does this kind of rituals in private because of the current situation and current political climate. But they do have their family ties. They do conduct their rituals. And the fact that when I go to Saudi Arabia, I'm able to meet the Indonesians who actually practice certain rituals that is associated with Habaibs or Sufism, it just shows that there is a community in Saudi Arabia. Of course, Dr. Sumanto will be the best person to answer this because he's actually there. But it just makes me think, that there is the existence of such communities in Saudi Arabia.
So I would like to add a little bit, Pak Nur Sahil.
Yeah.
So about Habaib, this one is there are a lot of misconceptions. Many people think that Saudi hate Habaib is misconceptions. This is my perceptions is. In fact, of course, there are many. We do not call Habaib here. We call it Sayyid or Sadah or Sayyid or Ashraf. We do not call Al Habaib generally. But Sadah group or Ashraf group is enormously here in Saudi. There are many Ashraf group. In fact, my students also, some of them also from the Ashraf family, from the Ashraf group, from Habaib group. But many people think that the Saudi society or Saudi government, they do not like Habaib, and it is enormously wrong. It's not true. What's happening is there are many Habaib group here. There are many they can perform their own religious ritual. When we talk about Sada group, it could be Sunni, it could be Shi'i group. Yeah, there are many Sada group within Shia community also, which is I know very well, and I have made a connection with some of them, which is this is a wrong perception from Indonesians' perspective. Yeah, so which is, but this is not this is not the focus of my book. So this is why I do not discuss specifically on the Sada religious group. Maybe people think that the Saudi society do not like Sada group because looking at the historical path. But now everything changed. Everything enormously changed. As Pak Nur Sahil mentioned, which is true. About the roles of women, for example, in public things is enormously changed. Even in my university, in King Fahd University was in the past was only for male. Only from now it began to embrace women. Female student, they accept female student, they accept female teachers, professors, scientists. So this is everything's changed. Everything changed. And one thing that Indonesians in general think is that which is wrong. They think that everything's about militancy and others always from Saudi, which is actually not. Many of them actually from Indo-Pakistan, for example, alumni of Deobandi, for example, from Indo-Pakistan, they contributed to militancy in Indonesia, or maybe from Yemen, or maybe from Sudan, maybe from other places, not necessarily from Saudi Arabia, even from the West. Many conservative group, militant group, actually graduated from the Western academic institutions. So we have to think about this to change our perspective, to change our mind that militancy, conservatism is always connected to the which is in fact in reality is not. Looking at Indonesia, many conservative group actually in Indonesia has been trained in Indonesia, not trained in the Middle East, or had been trained in the West, not trained in the Middle East. This is something that we need to understand. There is a dynamics. And, within this issue, yeah, and in fact, not all students, alumni from Middle Eastern institutions become militant, become conservative. As I mentioned in the book, many examples of graduate alumni from the Middle East, which is actually they become promoters of moderations in Indonesia. That's it, Fauzan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sumanto, and thank you so much, Dr. Nur Sharil. Before we end, I think on the topic of Habaib.
One more question, right? About the youth. actually. Just a quick.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot you haven't responded to that question. Please, Dr.
That's a
Nusharin.
quick one. Thanks for the question. I think when we discuss about youth, I think it's very dynamic. Singapore youth, yep. After 1970s, there's a greater sense of religiosity happening across society in Southeast Asia, and the youths are not excluded from this. But to say that there is one single unified youth religiosity is also wrong. And apart from that, I think based on our discussion today, it's not only Saudi Arabian Puritan kind of Islam that's affecting youths. Especially in the age of social media, they're all exposed to all kinds of versions and orientations out there. There's a range, and I think we must also understand certain changes that's happening in the community, particularly the rise of the middle class and accessibility. So not necessarily the Middle East that's influencing our youth. There are also, as Dr. Sumanto mentioned, Western preachers, and also in the region. Singaporean youths are also affected by what's happening in Malaysia and Indonesia. So I think it's complex. We have to see where the trend is heading to. Yeah. Thanks, Fauzan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sumanto and Dr. Nusharin. Just to pick up on the point about Habaib, I think there's a very interesting book that was just recently published by Princeton University Press. The title is "What is Religious Authority? Cultivating Islamic Communities in Indonesia" by Ismail Fajri Alatas, an anthropologist at NYU. So this book, traces the movements of Muslim saints and scholars from Yemen to Indonesia, and looks at how the rise of Habaib in the past and today has impacted on Indonesian society. So I think it's a very good book for us to, read to understand better about the question that Steve Gaspers posed to Dr. Sumanto just now. And another note, because I started off our discussion today by mentioning Mona Abaza, who has informed some of our understanding of Islamic studies in Indonesia. I received news from actually one of the audiences that she has actually passed away yesterday. So let's keep her in our thoughts and our prayers, and let's pray that she rests in peace. So on that note, right, on that solemn note, we shall end this, and I would like to thank Dr. Sumanto again and Dr. Nusharin for taking the time. And I think we had a very good discussion, and I wish to see our participants again in our next episode or in our future events. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Okay, thanks, Fauzan. Thank the Middle East Institute for organizing this again. Thank you.